Hello and welcome to Tech.0, your popular technology magazine show with Chris and Ben. You're listening to episode 1, released in April 2019. My name is Ben, and as ever, I'm joined by Chris. This episode will be discussing password managers, instant messaging, and discussing virtual learning environments with Mike Collins from the Open University. Let's get to it. So I'd like to have a quick chat about password managers, because I currently use a password manager called 1Password. And I'm very pro password managers. A password manager is basically an application that securely stores all of your passwords for all of your accounts. Optionally, it will tie into your browser, so it will automatically input passwords and normally usernames and potentially other information for you. Might also optionally link up to a web service, so you can easily sync your passwords between other devices like your phone and your desktop and maybe a work computer. As I said, I use 1Password, but I'm kind of looking to change. I want something a bit more cross-platform and possibly where I can host the online bit myself. Do you, Chris, use a password manager, and do you have any thoughts?
So I use LastPass. I really like it. Like as a product, I really like it. There's a few awkward bits, but a lot of that I'm not entirely sure is their fault. Like on Android, it's always awkward entering the password, and every time they say, "Oh, we fixed it," like on either side, Android side or LastPass's side, it's still awkward.
As a slight tangent, being an iPhone user, I don't use Android and haven't used Android for anything more than poking around. On iPhone, there's a framework that enables apps to tie into password managers, and that's facilitated by iOS. If there's a password field in an application, for instance, Spotify, I can click in the, say, username field. The application knows it's a username password field, and when the keyboard pops up, I get an autocomplete option to say, would you like to use your password manager? Is there anything sort of similar on Android for that?
That's interesting, because I use LastPass on an iPad Pro as well, and I haven't come across that. I need to look into that. There is something similar on Android. I'm running Android 9, I think it is the latest version on the OnePlus 6. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to be 100% reliable. I don't know if that's because there needs to be some app support, like on the actual receiving app, or anything else. Like there's a bunch of things that could be causing that. And I quite often end up going into the notifications, finding the persistent notification, clicking on it, finding the site, copying and pasting the password. It is awkward. Like, it's awkward enough that sure, I'll do it, but I can't imagine regular users bothering with it.
So it's very much one of those problems whereby you understand why a password manager is good and you want to use it, but to be honest, if it were a non-technical user that perhaps didn't understand, not the convenience, but the security aspects behind it, they probably just would remain using, I don't know, password 123.
Yeah. So I should point out I've recommended to non-technical users and my friends and family to use one, and some of them do and get by fine. They probably complain about the same problems I do, but they understand the need of it. The bit that worries me is the people who aren't being pushed by others to maybe do it.
Yeah. And I think probably just an important thing to point out for anyone that doesn't use one and doesn't know, these managers don't just look after your passwords and store them securely. Quite often they will generate passwords for you. So I think in my 1Password vault, I have very, very few passwords that are less than 64 characters long.
I'm not quite that level, but I'm at a level where people, when they see my password, they normally gasp. I
very, very rarely enter a password manually. I might as well have it as long as possible, and that's, I think, as long as 1Password will do it. Now, some sites, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but some sites do require me to have an 8-character password and that's it, or a 16 or something like that. And so I do have.
The other problem with that is games consoles. If you use a games console, entering a password there, 64-character password, is painful, especially because you're likely to get it wrong.
Yes. Yeah, no, I have been there.
There's some exceptions.
Yeah, no, I do get that. So that's probably an interesting question then. For those sort of situations, what password length do you like?
I use a passphrase in those sections. So okay. The password is pretty long still, but it's much easier to type.
Yes, absolutely.
Hopefully that's a good compromise. There's a bunch of times. So I also use GeForce Now, I think it's called, which is NVIDIA's game streaming platform. Mainly to play games at work in the lunch hour.
Oh right, okay. I'm glad you qualified with it in the lunch hour.
Yeah, I'm working the rest of the time. How that works is it's sort of running a VM in the cloud on a computer in NVIDIA's data center, and it streams the game to you, but you still have to log in on their computer. Yeah, so the security risk of that concerns me, but typing in a random 64-character password is painful, like to a point where I wouldn't use the service.
Absolutely.
So I've switched to something that is still long, but I can type pretty quickly, and that seems to work.
I'm a big fan of self-hosting services, so I have a Nextcloud instance that I maintain, and recently I've made some changes to my desktop arrangements, and I have to input my Nextcloud password manually if I want to use it. I'm quite well versed at typing passwords in off the bat. I very rarely get them wrong, but I must admit, sitting there and manually typing in my 64-character Nextcloud password is rather tiring.
So what are you thinking of switching to them?
So I'm basically looking around, and I've looked around probably for the last year or so, and I've come up with 3 possibilities. The first possibility is to use KeePass. KeePass seems to be recommended by everyone. I've used it at work, I've used it at multiple workplaces, and it's a really neat little application that does password management. You can get plugins for your browser that will automatically copy and paste password and usernames into it. It's a little light on features when I contrast it to, or compare it to 1Password. 1Password has got Have I Been Pwned integration and various other sort of niceties. It'll tell you how old passwords are, flag weak passwords to you, that kind of thing. 1Password basically just keeps passwords safe. It also doesn't do syncing. So if you want to take it somewhere else with you, you've got to manually pick up the little database that it generates and either bung it on your Nextcloud or your Google Drive or a thumb drive or whatever and take it with you.
That removes some of the advantage of using that, especially if you're using Google Cloud or OneDrive or something. Like, you're trying to avoid it being stored remotely, I assume.
So I personally am not. I'm
okay.
Because the other thing is that I use password managers on my phone. So I need it stored somewhat remotely so that I can sync it to my phone. KeePass is definitely an option, but doesn't have the key aspect that is missing for me is the syncing feature. The next possibility, which for some personal preferences, which I'll get into, may not work, is Bitwarden. So Bitwarden is a open source password manager that has a commercial arm to it. You can self-host the server end of it, and there are iOS and Android and desktop apps there. It's got browser integration. It seems to have everything that I want. However, the server is only delivered in a Docker container, which shouldn't be a problem, but I don't want to have to run a lone Linux machine just to run a Docker container. I already have a FreeBSD VPS.
Run a Linux VM with a Docker container inside the VM? Because you can't have enough nesting these days.
Well, of course, I could have a jail running Beehive with Linux in running Docker.
Yeah,
sure,
solved.
Sure, brilliant. Yes.
I have actually done that on FreeNAS. It's not as silly as it sounds because the jails, jails or Docker have such a sort of small overhead.
Oh yes.
That it's really just as slow as a VM.
Yeah, and to me, so yes, that's an option, but it feels like far too much complexity. Secondly,
the networking's a pain.
Yeah. Secondly, I'm quite embarrassed to say this, being a sort of sysadmin person, I've got basically zero experience with Docker. I don't want my password manager to be my first experience with Docker.
Yeah, I can comment on that. I've had a little bit of experience with Docker, but mainly in development, not in hosting. And it's always difficult being like, we're going to use this for hosting.
Perhaps a way forward with Bitwarden is to reach out to the Bitwarden community, see how receptive they might be to de-Dockerizing, or at least providing some instructions to de-Dockerize. I don't know how ingrained the application is. One option might be to reach out and see how receptive the community is to providing a non-Docker option, because then I might be able to port the server application over to FreeBSD.
Yeah, you never want to do it if it's not going to go back upstream. Like, you want that to be maintained by someone.
Absolutely. I mean, it wouldn't be quite so bad if there was a Docker file and I could just follow some instructions. Then I should just be able to follow these instructions every time, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But this doesn't seem to be built in quite that way. So that is a possibility. And that could mean that I run Bitwarden. The third and more adventurous option for a password manager to sort of fit my bill is to roll my own, which sounds awful.
No, don't do your own encryption. It's not worth it, Ben.
But I'm thinking that
don't do it.
I'm thinking that it could be really nice, because this is all. So Bitwarden is written in C#, and I've got no qualms about C# at all. It relies on the Microsoft's open source .NET framework, which I'm a little bit, do I really want to be running that on a server? I don't know. There probably isn't anything. I don't really have much of an opinion about it. it.
Like it's gonna. I don't not particularly keen on .NET, but it's just gonna be. I mean, it's a bit heavyweight as well, I suppose, but not as bad as Java.
Yeah. So,
but it's still gonna be perfectly secure for the job.
I'm kind of thinking that if I could get the key thing about rolling my own wouldn't be it's me doing it on my own. Because I can't do user interfaces, so I'd need help with applications. I'm awful at doing mobile application development, so definitely would need help there. But I'm thinking that a nice server-side application written in something like Rust, because I'd quite like to learn Rust, written in something like Rust or perhaps Go, would be cross-platform. That should be quite a nice lightweight server, and you wouldn't need an awful lot.
I suppose if it's just for you personally, then you can get something that's secure basically just through the fact that no one else uses it.
Of course, yes.
It's sort of secure enough.
Yes.
But it's probably not secure from a concerted attack, like someone trying to actually get into it. So I'd advise against that.
Of course.
I'd go with... I think I might actually go with Bitwarden from the look of this. I might just take the plunge with Docker.
Sure, yeah.
It depends. So the two really good experiences I've had for Docker was deploying a forum with Discourse.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. Their Docker setup, you put it on a server and you install it. It gets you the SSH key. Gets you the SSL certificate from... Where is it? What's the free provider?
Let's Encrypt.
Yes, it gets you a SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt. Sets all that up for you automatically, creates the database, does the whole thing. And then I did the update process, and that again is one or two commands. Like, it's so straightforward.
I think as well. So sorry, just to put it in. This is perhaps slightly more of a Docker conversation as opposed to a 1Password conversation. But I think that what you've said there, a lot of that scares me. Having transitioned to FreeBSD a few years ago, you have to do an awful lot of things yourself. And now I get a little bit twitchy when you install something and it kind of does everything for you. Yeah,
so the thing that I would check first, like my get out clause, I suppose, with anything I have previously installed via Docker is that at the end of the day I can always get the database, dump it out somewhere, and pop it back into a new instance of everything.
Yes, that's true.
Like resetting things isn't too difficult in those scenarios, especially if I've got regular database backups, which you should have.
Of course.
And that kind of gives you a bit of a safety net from those scenarios. And I don't know what Bitwarden safety net's like. If you can find a way that like if it's not creating keys that must be there, but as well, equally so you can back those keys up. So if you back up a key that's used to encrypt the vault, you should be able to just take a backup of that data and restore it in the future. I'd test it first.
So you just reminded me of another thing that may stop me from deploying BitLocker anytime soon, is that it also requires a Microsoft SQL server. That's its server.
Yeah,
backend.
That's a problem.
So sure, it runs on Linux now, so you can still go for an all Linux solution. But
this is something that stopped me doing .NET development. Was that the ecosystem is so tied to proprietary and commercial extensions.
Yes.
That when you you go to work and you learn all this stuff, and it was enjoyable. Like I liked working in .NET as a language. It's a really nice language to work in. But then you come home and you try and build something for yourself, something small.
Yes.
That, a toy project, whatever you're doing, and you cannot take any of that knowledge with you because you need a seat license for that particular part of the framework that you use, or you can only install this on a VM with one core because Microsoft have licensed it out to enterprises for bigger customers.
Yeah.
And that became really, really frustrating for me. That's when I decided to switch to Ruby on Rails development. Somehow went through PHP, but we won't talk about that.
Actually, now you've mentioned it, there is a chap called Joshua Stein. He's an OpenBSD user. And, of course, OpenBSD of OpenSSH fame, plus other OpenSSH... no, I just said OpenSSH, didn't I? OpenSSH and LibreSSL fame. He's a OpenBSD user. He was switching from, I'm presuming, he was switching from a Mac to OpenBSD. He was highly dependent on 1Password, and he switched to Bitwarden. However, he didn't fancy unpicking all the .NET dependencies and blah-de-blah-de-blah. So he went and, as far as I recall, he re-implemented the back end in Ruby.
Is that available open source?
It is.
You can do that.
And so he wrote this may make more sense to you than me, Chris. He wrote a Sinatra server that implements all the API calls needed by the Firefox extension for Bitwarden, and basically just created his own backend and used all of the Bitwarden front-end stuff. He just sort of mocked all the API calls.
So for your benefit there, Sinatra's a very lightweight Ruby framework.
Okay.
It's not Rails. In that scenario is a great use for Sinatra. The criticism of Sinatra normally is that if you build a full application with it, you find very quickly at the end of it, you've just built yourself another version of Rails because you've brought something in to do like view templates, you've brought something in to do user authentication, like you have to bring most of it in anyway.
Yes.
For most web apps. But for doing an API, it's really good. Though Rails is catching up on that as well.
Oh, cool.
So I have an opinion. I haven't really talked about this much, and I suppose it's not. I suppose it's more of a prediction.
Sure.
And that's that password managers will, in 10, 20 years' time, be thought of the way antivirus is now. This kind of maybe not outdated concept, but there's a trade-off with them. And at the moment, that trade-off makes a lot of sense. And antivirus has certainly, like the ecosystem around antivirus has certainly gotten to a point where you normally want to get your endpoint security or your antivirus off your operating system vendor, because people having root access to your machines, which your operating system does have, is a risk.
Yes.
So the smaller the number of vendors you can have with root access to the machine, the better. And it was that information, knowledge, and conversations around that made me switch to Windows Defender for my home computer and the rest of the family. And I think fundamentally password managers have the same problem. They are trading a little bit of risk. Your password is stored somewhere else on someone else's server. You know, a big high-profile target. If someone got into LastPass, that would be news everywhere. And for that, you're gaining a bunch of convenience and the ability to set stronger passwords. And at the moment, that makes sense because a lot of websites don't have good secure options. Like it's awkward to use long passwords, or if you reuse passwords, then that will probably get leaked somewhere and someone will be able to use it to get into another one of your accounts. But I think there's enough coming down the line in terms of especially browser-based biometrics and the browsers having this sort of functionality built in, like being able to authenticate and the browser says, yes, this user has correctly authenticated. And that will get ported to Android. It already kind of is on Android and iOS. And as that starts to happen, I think you're going to see a reduction in the need for password managers. I think what will come first is that sites will stop even offering their own authentication mechanisms. You'll authenticate through your operating systems.
So that's really interesting. At work, and actually at numerous places I've worked, first day I get a Windows laptop and told that the company browser is Internet Explorer. And for a few set applications that I've never used in any other company before or since, that application you have to use in Internet Explorer. And you try Firefox and you try Chrome and it does not work. I mean, it might render, but you're not going to get far in it. But quite often I will use Firefox and see how far I get with things. Because Internet Explorer is tied to Windows, and because Windows is tied to Active Directory, when I log into my current company's IT portal, it automatically just logs me in. I get straight through.
Is that SharePoint?
It's not. No, it's ServiceNow.
Okay.
And before that, it was something called Rainbow. But if I log into the same portal using Firefox, all of a sudden, I lose that integration, and I have to log in manually using a username and password. In sort of Microsoft environments, because I'm not seeing it, I don't know about it elsewhere. In Microsoft environments, we're already seeing exactly what you're kind of describing. And all it needs is for that to become slightly more generic, an open standard to be created around it, and for people to actually start using it.
I think the sort of closest representation of what I imagine in being sort of normal in the future is, I mean, even my bank application will let me log in on my phone via my fingerprint.
Yeah, same as mine, yes.
And it loads up, you scan your fingerprint and you're in. LastPass lets me do it as well. That's the authentication sort of being pushed off to the operating side, and it's very convenient for me. I have to worry about it. I believe that Windows at some point, I can never remember when this is supposed to be coming out, is getting Android phone-based authentication. So you authenticate on the Android phone, and it tells the Windows PC that you are authenticated. I know there's a authentication API coming down for web browsers.
This is all great, and I'm a Mac user generally at home, and I'm an iPhone user. Love all the integration and everything. As I was saying earlier, I love the fact that I just have to hit a password field in any application on my iPhone, and my iPhone knows it's a password field and that I might have a password in my password manager. What I hate is that is an Apple private framework, API, whatever it is. You don't get the same integrations if I switch to a Linux or a FreeBSD and actually what I think that we need in order to fully realize this is to have something that doesn't depend on Apple or Microsoft or Google putting something that bakes too deeply into their ecosystems.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the ecosystem. Apple obviously is going to be more difficult, but from what I understand, Firefox will be able to implement an authentication service that might even operate with their own user system. So your Mozilla account would be your sign-in. But then in terms of biometrics, you have to go through the operating system for that. So the browser will talk to the operating system and whatever operating system requirements will then be fulfilled sort of through that interface. Unfortunately, we can't get away from the dominance of the operating systems. They're this frustrating sort of grip on everything you do.
I think that what you've just described to me sounds exactly like DRM, actually. That you'll have some sort of trust in Windows, some sort of trust in Mac OS or Android or iOS. This feature that could be quite core to how we use the web is linked to some proprietary trust that we put in these proprietary systems. That would be a shame if that's the way it turns out.
I mean, I don't really want that world to exist, but unfortunately, it already does. Your Intel CPU has parts of it that you can't access.
Yes.
Certain amount where, for me at least, and this is a personal decision where I get to the point of, I'd rather live in Star Trek than, because I know that's a lot of the reason we want the IoT stuff and the fancy computer technology, and I'd rather be there with the problems than not. And that's not a choice that anyone can make for anyone else. And I feel very strongly that that privacy should be available for those that want it.
Yeah.
If you don't, I mean, I wish the world worked in a way where I could use Facebook for free, or what was the average value of Facebook user? I think it's like $20. Someone worked it out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, $20 a year or something. So like, I wish Facebook would let me just pay $20, and then I get removed from all of the stats, because then you can pick and choose.
Sure.
The problem is that the value is from the network, not the individuals. So by doing that,
you devalue the network. Can you imagine, though, if they were stupid enough to set something like that up? Because you would pay, let's say, $20, did you say?
Yeah, something like that.
So let's say $20. So let's say that right now you can pay $20 and you get removed from the public network, sort of. Well,
no, you say you gain access to all the features of Facebook, but you're no longer in any of the marketing or any of the applications. You get like an ad-free experience.
Now, wouldn't it be wonderful? So you pay your $20, and so that's it. We're in January, so let's say that it runs until the end of 2019. And a whole bunch of other users do exactly the same thing. Because it's tied to your value, to the value of this individual, because you've devalued the network by coming out, next year's subscription is less. So more people sign up. So the year after that, it's even less.
I mean, I also, if you want me to make more predictions that are clearly going to be wrong, I think Facebook is going to disappear.
Oh, no, come on. You said unrealistic. Of course Facebook's going to disappear. When the sun expands and...
This sort of segues into the other topic we want to talk about, which was Facebook merging WhatsApp and Messenger and Instagram Messenger. I think instant messaging has been around for almost all of my life. Certainly all the time I've been on the internet.
I think that it probably can be traced back to like the 80s.
So yeah, definitely. And to be honest, all of my adult life, I've always been connected to an instant messaging service somewhere. 8-12 hours a day. It seems silly now, but if you went back to the late 90s, early 2000s, and told people then that within 6 years, MSN Messenger was going to be dead.
Well, that would have been crazy.
Yeah. And here we are. It's gone. I think it might actually still... I think you can still sign into it.
No, I can't remember. In the last 2 or 3 years, it actually got shut down.
Oh, really? Okay.
I remember... So this is sad. This is... I always think about things like this and I always think about it like an hour before or an hour after and then never actually get around to doing it. I was going to log on and be booted off. So I remember that it happened.
Oh, I see. That's nice. Okay, I like it. Yeah, I do kind of miss MSN, but WhatsApp's more or less replaced it for me. And I just think these things have like a natural growth cycle. Something else will come along. They're so cheap to make. And I really don't mean to take away from the accomplishments of the engineers on them, because WhatsApp is the engineering behind it is amazing. I don't know if you followed it when they were starting up before they sold to Facebook. They ran on a handful of servers. They had 40 employees and 1 billion users.
So just as an aside, they were FreeBSD servers.
They were.
They were.
Okay, that's cool. And they used XMPP running with what's the language?
Wasn't it like Erlang or something like that?
So yeah, WhatsApp's written Erlang. That engineering is glorious. When we used to be able to pay for WhatsApp, I'd pay for it not just for myself, but for my friends, because the engineering was great, the user experience was great. It was so simple.
Yeah,
and I thought that was worth paying for. I wanted to be there, and they sold to Facebook, and I was quite disappointed. I don't think Facebook's gonna be around forever. I don't think WhatsApp's gonna be around forever. I think the merging of them probably makes them stronger. Like they might stay around a bit longer as a result.
So I think that with that, WhatsApp is an interesting one. If I said to the average person on the street, what is WhatsApp? They could probably answer me with that question. If I ask them what is Facebook, they can more than definitely answer that question. If I said who owns WhatsApp, they probably wouldn't know that it was Facebook. Now, I think what that gives WhatsApp, and therefore gives Facebook, is if Facebook ever needed to, they could spin off WhatsApp as a complete separate entity, sell it off to another company to be run as another service.
This would kind of suggest that would be more difficult once they've merged them. From what I was reading, they plan to allow cross-network communication. So you'll be able to talk to your Facebook Messenger friends from WhatsApp.
And Instagram as well, I believe.
Yeah, and Instagram.
Have you ever used Telegram?
I have. I sometimes still do.
Okay.
Very nervous about Telegram because I believe it's owned by a Russian company.
Ooh.
And doesn't necessarily encrypt all of its data.
According to Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge, Telegram was launched in 2013 by brothers Nikolai and Pavel Durov. Previously, the pair founded the Russian social network VK. Yes, it looks like, if not in Russia still, then certainly by Russians.
And they also, I believe, when they first launched, rolled their own encryption.
Yes.
That's not great.
Way back when I started using WhatsApp, I thought very much like you that it was great. Then Telegram came along, and it had encryption. And I thought that would be better, because I figured that some encryption was better than no encryption.
Yep.
You know, I don't know whether I'm right or not on that still to this day, but that seemed to make sense to me back in, I guess, maybe around about 2012-ish, 13-ish. However, and it was not long after that Facebook bought WhatsApp, and I thought, well, this is definitely the end. And then WhatsApp got the Signal protocol and got end-to-end encryption and all the good things.
Yeah, so you can verify user context, you get perfect forward secrecy.
Absolutely.
And yeah, end-to-end encryption, so that even WhatsApp can't read your messages.
Precisely.
As it currently stands, we think.
Yes. The interesting thing about the news that Facebook is going to merge the 3 chat apps is I've seen a lot of users crying that this is the end of their privacy and that we should all migrate to Telegram.
You shouldn't migrate to Telegram.
Just that they don't want the integration and that therefore you should go to Telegram.
You should not migrate to Telegram. If you're going to migrate to anywhere, migrate to Signal. In fact, I'd like to plug a resource here from the EFF, which is ssd.eff.org. It's surveillance self-defense, and it will give you, there's a bunch of guides on how to set up various different chat protocols and what you should be thinking about in terms of this personal security if there are parts of your life you want to remain private. I use Signal, and I use Signal to communicate about things that I do want to remain private. And I think having that is a great thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't personally even trust WhatsApp with that. The difficulty with WhatsApp is, from the outside, have you been kind of following the story with, I can't remember the guy's name, the owners of WhatsApp?
I should know his name. I haven't been following the story, no.
They sold out for a lot of money. Was it like $2 billion or something ridiculous?
It was an awful lot of money, yes.
I'm not going to blame him. I think that amount of money, after doing all that work, I can totally understand being tempted, right?
Sure, yeah.
He was supposed to serve in the company for a long period of time afterwards as well, so he felt he would have significant influence within the company, and it shows that implementing the Signal protocol meant that they did. And to be honest, that maybe even slowed down what Facebook would have done with the data otherwise.
Absolutely, yes.
Publicly, as far as we know then, he left the board early. In the process, sacrificed quite a chunk of the money he would have otherwise earned from Facebook, and also told everyone that Facebook was going to be mining the data from WhatsApp as soon as it could. And I suspect that this sort of integration of everything is going to lead to that. We will end up in reality with everything using a single protocol.
Yes.
Just with different ways of identifying it, a different skin on the messaging UI. Like you can make the UI whatever you want, have the same API behind it all. And then Facebook will, through that, be able to look at the data as required. And I think the way they'll do it will still allow them to claim it's encrypted. Whether or not we'll be able to show it's end-to-end encrypted or not, I don't know.
So I guess the other thing that Facebook undoubtedly have pressure under is that Facebook and therefore WhatsApp are American-based entities and will have, I can't recall any stories from the past, but certainly Apple have been criticised by the FBI, by American government for withholding information that they can't give because it's end-to-end encrypted. If Facebook can mine the data from WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook Messenger, then obviously that's a great business resource for them. But they can also then get governments around the world off their back by saying, look, don't tell anyone, but we can give you the information that you want. And that's got to put them in great stead with governments when you compare that to, say, the likes of Apple that won't do that.
Yeah, it's really difficult there. I think that's kind of happening in a bunch of different areas, and the interesting bit I've seen from that is like it's a sort of a situation where you don't feel as if the companies are that unified. Like we've seen Google in some hands cooperating with the government. I mean, they're forced to, but how willing that is maybe up for debate. And at the same time, we've seen them encrypting their back-end links so that even if someone does plug some hardware in somewhere along the line, they no longer assume it's secure. But this isn't meant to sound too cynical, but I think there's only a limited amount you can do. Yeah, you've got to do sort of proper threat analysis and work out what is the correct level of security for you. What do you think you need to keep private? What do you not care if people know about? Maybe you're happy with everyone knowing about it.
Yes, and I think, to be honest, so if I just open up WhatsApp, and I've got my phone on airplane mode at the moment so it doesn't go off while we are recording. If I look at my most recent messages, basically, so here in the UK we've had some snow today, and it's mainly people going, snow! Do I really care if somebody intercepts messages about me telling other people it's snowing when you can log on to the news and it'll tell you that it's snowing?
The worst that I can probably get from some of my chats is a inappropriate or bad joke. Like,
I dare say that with enough data that a profile can be made up of me, and that I may later regret that profile has been made up, not because it's nasty, but because it somehow exploits an element of my personality or being or background or whatever. But no, broadly, I'm with you. The little things that I discuss, really, they don't need to be encrypted.
But there are people who do have significant things that they need to keep secret.
Absolutely.
And for legitimate reasons. There are people who are in a situation where if someone found out about their sexuality, they could lose their house, their job. That sucks. Like, the world shouldn't be like that. But I think we need to acknowledge that, and that these tools can help. They're not going to solve the problem.
I think that it's important, as always, to remember that encrypted communication can help the bad guys. It can allow them to go under surveillance and communicate and organise. However, it also gives us freedom because it allows people that are marginalised to speak with each other, and it also allows whistleblowers to contact the press and for us, general public, to understand the truth. If we didn't have encrypted communications, a whole lot of good things wouldn't be possible.
Online banking relies on it, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like, I know the UK government is trying to do this, like banning encryption and all sorts of ideas, and it's not possible. Like, it's maths. It's been created, and this is the world we live in now, and we have to work with that. I'm glad that we live in a universe where encryption can be a thing, where I can have private long distance communication and be relatively certain that no one else is reading that.
Yeah. Now I'd like to introduce Michael Collins.
Hello, I'm Mike Collins. I'm a learning designer working out of the Open University.
Can you briefly summarise for us what your job entails?
So we work as part of what's currently called LTI, which is Learning and Teaching Innovations. to support the faculties in producing their module material. Open University is obviously a distance learning university, and we help kind of form a bridge between the production side and the authoring and design and development side of modules. So that goes across quite a wide spread of stuff, but most of it's digital. So we'll advise on tool use, technique, research, structure, that sort of thing. We'll also provide after the design phase, post-launch kind of analytics, support, that sort of thing.
Do you do any direct content creation yourselves?
So we do... I used to be involved in production. I used to work in development and production team, where it was actually sort of producing the content itself, or at least being part of the production process. We also help them kind of with asset creation and stuff, although there are a lot of specialist teams within the university who've got sort of very specific spheres of interest. We've got a video and audio team, graphics teams, interactive media teams.
You mentioned that you provide analytics back to the teams. What sort of analytics do you collect?
Okay, so we have a system called SAS VA. I couldn't tell you what it stands for, although I'm pretty sure the VA element is visual analytics. And what that does is it works as an aggregate for the tens of thousands of different databases that we've got dotted around. So we collect data on just about anything. I mean, obviously, all within kind of data protection rules and GDPR and this, that, and the other. On demographics of students coming in, attainment, that sort of thing. So how they're doing with submissions, assessments. We also collect it off of our VLE system. So we've got very, very basic analytics available on our VLE. And by basic, I mean think early 2000s kind of Google Analytics basic, if not late 90s.
So what sort of questions are you answering from those analytics?
Yeah, I've just come off the back of a load of data support meetings. And what we are doing is, at the early stage, is working out the very, very basic questions. So there's a load of KPIs that modules have to hit on, for example, retention of students. So, actually keeping students in the course, as well as with assessments. They want to hit submission targets. They want to hit, there'll be target grades for students that they'll be trying to hit. So there's very, very basic ones initially, and also kind of student numbers, this, that, and the other. It's all very, very basic, but it's starting off looking throughout the life of the module to work out if there's any problems with it. So, for example, we'd be looking at VLE engagement overall. So going, for example, we've got students they tend to disconnect a bit around the Christmas period, and you'll see VLE engagement on sort of a primarily digital module drop from 85% in a given week of students visiting the VLE all the way down to sub 30.
Wow.
And then slowly climb back up again after that. Even though kind of the actual break in the calendar is only 1 or 2 weeks, it will be a much slower climb back out of that, back up to a kind of full whack, normally sort of led by assessment, I should point out.
So there's normally an assessment before people start coming back onto the VLE to get back into it.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we try and do as part of data support is to provide. So one of the things we call is analytics for action. So we try and provide solutions. We try and sort of provide guidance on what you can do when the analytics say you've got, if not a problem, then an opportunity for improvement. So say, for example, you've got a module which is experiencing a drop in students' engagement on the VLE around a certain period. Now, there could be a whole load of reasons for that. It could be, for example, that you've got a load of activities which are delivered online, but then the actual work for them is offline, so people are going offline to do the work, or they're going sort of by offline, to other platforms. Maybe they've got Facebook groups where they're doing communicative activities, that sort of thing. It could also be the fact that maybe the material isn't quite as engaging in that point, or maybe you've just not signposted how students should be kind of navigating through the module at that point. You could, for example, have had an absolute monster of a chunk of learning a couple of weeks back, which students are still trying to chew their way through in order to get the content you've currently got, or maybe there's nothing really on there that's making them think that it's directly impacting assessment. And students tend to be quite assessment focused, so they'll be going, it's not going to basically contribute to them passing the course. If they can bypass it and it's clear to them they can, then they will, because why wouldn't you? So it's things like that, and kind of identifying places where, okay, there's this fallow period here, and historically, if you're looking over the last 3 or 4 years worth of presentations, this is a dip in engagement point. Why don't you do something here at week X or week Y which involved this, or this. For example, you could have a tutor intervention, so you could sort of get your tutors to contact the students either through the tutor groups or maybe any other informal groups they've got going to kind of, chivvy them into it. You could throw a bit of extra content in there just to kind of spice it up a little bit, see if you can entice people in. Some modules do something called active presentation, where they've got active Facebook and Twitter presences, so they can kind of chivvy people with that. Or alternatively, if it is because you've got a particularly meaty lump, which is sort of, consuming a lot of people's time going into it, then you look back at that and you see if you can address that problem.
Cool. You mentioned the VLE a lot. I'm assuming as it's an online course, you use a VLE. Sorry, I should clarify for our audience, that's a virtual learning environment. You use a VLE an awful lot to develop the materials for the courses?
Well, not to develop, no. So the Open University... definitely to deliver. So the Open University is a distance learning institution. Started using Moodle back then, and it's been a very gradual shift over the last X years to get everything, well, not everything, but to get the vast majority of module content delivered online. And that's been quite a tough shift because the university historically, was very famous for delivering lots of books, videotapes, DVDs, CDs, that sort of thing.
I remember watching it as a child in the mornings. For anyone outside of the UK, the Open University would broadcast during the night, and you were supposed to record it and then watch it then the next day or over the next few weeks. And that's not how it's done anymore.
No, but it is absolutely fabulous. We've got access to the archive.
Oh, right,
and it's
nice.
the 50th. It's the Open University's 50th anniversary this year, which is great fun. And we've been amusing ourselves by going through some of the old television programs we used to put out. Oh my god, they would slay you. We had some fantastic ones. We had, like the stereotypical OU professor from the telly back in the day of like sandals, cable knit jumper, big beard, mad eyes. So one of them was that, and it was the guy basically talking about a sort of a pre-internet thing, about how you'd have this device you could plug into your telly and you'd plug it into your phone line and your lecturer would be able to draw at one end of the phone line and like the drawing would come out at the other end, and how this was going to revolutionise education.
That's
like, and this box is only £200 and we'll soon have this in every single home in the UK, and kind of all this cool new technological innovation they were super excited about. I think none of which probably survived the year, let alone survives today.
So that was going to be my question, that not having used a VLE, given what you just said, it's not a case of the lecturer draws on one end and it magically appears on your computer screen. What sort of activities happen inside a VLE?
Okay, so it's basically a glorified website. You could do the same with any sort of website, and there are some distance learning institutions and places that do training, which do a very good job of delivering sort of distance education through non-VLEs.
Okay.
The likes of WordPress or custom websites. The difference with a VLE is it tends to be built around the specific educational quirks and needs. So, for example, Moodle by default has a load of assessment stuff built into it, things like student and cohort management, a load of permission sets for sort of students, tutors, dum-de-dum-de-dum-de. And the basic version of it is designed to be quite simple to spin up, as in to deploy, but also to create content in it. You can whack into the WYSIWYG editor quite simply and just start writing stuff, and you can put it in front of students with moderate to little real trouble.
And I guess the sort of terms used within it then, because it's aimed at education, are educational type terms rather than having sort of manager and a user. You'd have a lecturer and a student, that it would use that sort of terminology, so it's familiar to those in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, so I know our version. So the Open University runs its own version of Moodle. I think it's OU Moodle. So we've got ours pretty heavily customized with things like roles. So we've got something like 20 different roles in it. I think I'm technically a workspace updater or something. But yeah, you've got your students and tutor roles and all of that. I'm pretty sure the kind of general role management is a native part of Moodle.
So you said it's an open source project. It's still under development even today?
Moodle's sort of constantly getting changed. There's actually a big thing at the moment, or should I say a small thing, because it's on your mobile phone. Moodle has a mobile app now, which is pretty neat. And there's this interesting quirk where, because the university heavily customizes Moodle to kind of fit its own needs, we used to do that because Moodle was, a little bit basic and a little bit old fashioned. So it was not just to kind of like match our systems and things, but also to, make it do stuff that we wanted it to do. But because we're such a lab, sort of a beast, we've got so much kind of institutional momentum behind our version of it, Moodle's overtaken us. So core Moodle, the basic version, has overtaken us. And on top of everything else, they've got a mobile app now.
Oh, so it's still developed independently from the university. The university hasn't dominated development completely.
No, not at all. So yeah, we contribute stuff to the Moodle project. So for example, we've developed a load of activities, different interactions. We've contributed a lot to ICMAs, which are interactive computer marked assignments, and different components within that. But the project itself is still, I'll be honest with you, I kind of got this in my head, just a collection of sort of net wizards who gather at sort of Elrond style council periodically and go, aha, the Council of Moodle, we have met.
So how does the university manage the development? Is it an internal team at the university working on this and pushing contributions up? Or is it external companies that are coming in and doing paid work for the university?
So development at a large scale is managed by both IT and a learning systems team. It's also fed into by a student experience team who do a lot of the UX work. But a lot of the sort of the grunt work development is done at a platform level, is done offshore, or at least was done offshore. A lot of the kind of the fun little gribbly bits that we contribute to the wider project, I believe, are done by not so much one-man bands, but smaller project teams.
How does the university collect feedback for the VLE and feed that back into the Moodle project?
There's been a couple of big projects around collecting feedback. Obviously, we've always had a feedback button on the VLE, which just kind of throws off your generic kind of free text response box, which makes its way to the appropriate team for them to do with as they wish. But then there was a big, primarily UX-focused redesign where they brought in a load of students on site for testing. They did a load of remote testing. They had consultants in. It was a really, really big, multifaceted kind of combination IT and learning system projects, and it actually led to, I believe, the creation of the student experience team. And that team's still going today. So there's now an ongoing commitment to developing the UX, progressing the UX of the VLE. It started at a visual kind of platform level and sort of a load of quality of life usability things, and it's now been making its way down to component levels. So, individual components are getting kind of picked over. Is there stuff that can be improved with them? And now individual tools and resources as well.
So that student experience team, that's a formal team staffed by employees that's trying to improve the experience for students.
Yeah, so they're aligned with the learning systems team who look after the learning systems from kind of a TEL and LTI perspective and help out with development on those. Obviously, IT kind of exist underneath and alongside all of this because they've got they control the developers and the relationships and this, that, and the other. But yeah, the student experience team are a primarily UX focused team.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, Mike?
Just that I think the really interesting thing about VLEs is that basically, as soon as people started adopting them, they were like, this is the greatest thing ever. Because we're doing it on websites, it's going to make it, quicker and easier and cheaper and more scalable to teach people. And that is absolutely not the case. But the reality is that the VLEs are still just a delivery method and you still need the actual teachers there. And it turns out you can't get by with less teachers just because you're delivering at scale. Even though the content itself is being pushed out at a massive level, nice and easy to just slap up a VLE, whiz it up, content out, bam. You still need an absolute army of associate lecturers to actually do the teaching for it.
So when you say do the teaching, do you mean supporting that teaching when there's questions that come back in? Or do you mean just writing the course material?
Writing the course material is done by module teams within the university. With the actual kind of active teaching element, it turns out that just slapping something on a website and then putting 4 assessments in the middle of it doesn't, for a great learning experience, make.
No, of course not.
Yeah, and surprisingly, when not great learning experience had, a student succeedeth not. A student go home bored, a student no longer attend, fees no pay, very sad. Yeah, not succeeding degree, which is kind of the whole point of the affair. So you still need all the teachers and associate lecturers. And there's got to be a point at some stage where you sit there and go, have you, by swapping your conventional teaching methods for VLE-delivered learning, basically tried to save money and instead shot yourself in the foot? That we had a huge backlash because there was a miscommunication which basically made people think the university was getting rid of books. so we weren't going to deliver books anymore. Everybody was like, up in arms. No, the Open University's always done books and we go to the Open University for books. And it's not the case. They're trying to do they're trying to improve how the digital content is delivered, better suit what they want to teach to the medium. And sometimes the web is good for that. Sometimes a book is good for that. Sometimes a face-to-face tutorial or an online tutorial with your tutor is the best way to do that. So yeah, it's kind of this interesting seesaw between this kind of wholesale adoption of VLEs. And I know it's a definite kind of growing field elsewhere in higher and distance education. But the fact that at the end of the day, it's not always going to be the best way to teach people.
Do you feel, though, that we can still... Because obviously education is a very expensive thing to deliver to people. Do you feel that there's some potential for us to sort of scale that, even a little bit, even if you could?
Oh, absolutely.
So, and are VLEs part of that?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, absolutely. They're very... I mean, if you compare it to producing, storing and shipping books, VLEs are a very efficient way to deliver material. They allow you to deliver material that would otherwise be very difficult to deliver, like interactive activities. A lot of media-rich courses would be very difficult to deliver on a pallet load of DVDs. And they also allow you to facilitate things like distance meetings with tutors. We, for example, use Adobe Rooms. Have you ever used that?
No, I've not.
So Adobe Rooms, which lets you have kind of virtual classrooms where you've got, it's a bit like Discord actually, where you can have multiple people in chat and voice channels, but it's also got a lot of really neat kind of meeting/education focused functions with, shared whiteboards, different sets of permissions, breakout rooms, that sort of thing.
So you can have more of that interactive experience with other students and the tutor.
Yeah, and that's really, really important. It's one of the things that has been, there's a lot of research that basically says students who engage in collaboration do better. They don't like it. Students don't like collaborating, but they do better.
So I think that's everything. Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks for your time.
My absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to our first episode. You can follow us on Twitter at tech_point_0. We hope you join us again for the next episode.